Welcome, my maid. Even though she knows I'm here to meet for a marriage proposal, this is the first thing she says. I let out a confused sound, thinking I must have heard wrong. My future mother-in-law, Olivia, looks at me with a mean smile and says, "Oh, you're not the maid. You have such a poor-looking face." The fiancé I thought was on my side, Scott, betrayed me in the worst way. He glanced at my face and burst out laughing. "You're right, she does have a poor-looking face. I'd love to see her parents." "Really? I wonder if your parents would faint from shock at seeing a house as wealthy as ours," Olivia added. Olivia and Scott kept looking down on me, even making fun of my parents. I couldn't take it anymore and sent a message to my father while they weren't looking. He replied quickly, saying he would come right away. "I'm going to get some fresh air," I said, unable to bear Scott's insults any longer. "Don't run away." Scott's rude laughter echoed as I left to wait for my father's arrival. 15 minutes later, I introduced my father, Richard, to Scott and his mother. "Here's the slave's father," Scott said. His voice was calm, but his eyes were not smiling. "Wait, father, mother," Olivia said, her face going pale when she recognized my father. "I am Kelly, turning 31 this year, working in a small company. I've lived my life trying not to stand out. That's why I usually wear just foundation and prefer navy or black clothes. I don't wear contacts and instead have thick glasses because of my high prescription. The reason for being so low-key is that my father had a high-profile job, and it influenced me since childhood. My father is an actor. He was quite popular back in the day, often surrounded by women when walking through town. Though he usually played supporting roles, he still appears on TV quite often and is moderately well known. Middle school was tough because of my father. Classmates would ask for his autograph, and their parents wanted to meet him. Since I refused all these requests, I was often criticized. I must have seemed unfair to them. I even faced bullying from jealous classmates. I didn't want to trouble my dear father, and I also hated the idea of being seen as showing off. Struggling with these thoughts, I dressed simply and went to a high school where no one knew me. Luckily, I had a common last name, so I could live normally from then on. Because of my plain appearance, men didn't approach me, allowing me to enjoy a carefree student life. I loved talking about comics with my female friends, and those times felt like the happiest moments for me. I met my fiancé, Scott, after I started working. Scott worked for the company that leased the copy machines to the place where I worked. I didn't talk to him much at first. Scott would come to check on the copy machine, and we would exchange a few words during his visits. Our relationship changed a lot one day when the copy machine broke. I was busy preparing materials for a meeting the next day, and when the machine stopped working, I panicked. I wouldn't be able to get the materials ready without it, so I called Scott. Scott came quickly and checked the copy machine. "Can it be fixed?" I asked him, worried. He smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." I fell in love with Scott's smile right then. Unfortunately, the copy machine couldn't be fixed, but Scott arranged for a replacement. We managed to prepare the materials in time for the meeting. Having fallen for Scott, I made an effort to get closer to him. I asked for his contact information and called him often. Then I confessed my feelings to Scott, and we started dating. Scott was always very kind. He was always considerate, and I had never seen him angry. I thought he would continue to be kind even after knowing about my father. So, after dating for 2 months, I boldly proposed to Scott, and he happily accepted. I remember being very happy. However, there was one thing that worried me: my appearance. I had always worn thick glasses, even on dates, and I dressed plainly. It was a habit that was hard to break. The real me looked just like my father, with distinct features because of my appearance. In middle school, other girls envied me, and I've been judged by boys because of how I look. It was tough, but I thought it would be okay with Scott. I planned to change my appearance little by little for the man I loved. However, after getting engaged to Scott, I started feeling more uncomfortable. Before our engagement, Scott seemed kind, but recently, he started making comments that made me feel bad. The other day, we went to a bridal fair to choose a wedding venue because Scott suggested it. The place he took me to was very fancy. It was a beautiful guest house perfect for a big wedding with over 200 guests. Seeing that, I felt confused. I don't have many friends from school, and I didn't want to stand out. I had hoped for a small ceremony at a smaller venue. I wanted to go home right away, but Scott seemed to be having a good time, so I didn't bring it up. I stayed and went along with it. After it was over, we stopped by a cafe, and Scott was in a great mood. The wedding venue we saw earlier was nice, wasn't it? I'd like something even more extravagant, he said while drinking coffee. I felt anxious and decided to tell Scott what I wanted. I was thinking a small wedding with just the two of us might be nice. I don't like standing out too much. I thought kind Scott would understand. However, the reality was very different. Scott looked at me and laughed in a mean way. A plain girl like you wouldn't fit in a place like that. There's probably no dress that suits your thick glasses. I was shocked by Scott's comment. Isn't a wedding about both families? I asked. My family is wealthy, and not having a big wedding would be embarrassing, he continued. I was speechless. The Scott who had always been kind was now looking down on me like he was a different person. I was deeply hurt by his attitude. To my confusion, Scott made an even worse comment. You should just keep quiet and do as I say, he added. Scott looked at me with a serious face and said, A plain woman like you should be grateful to get married at all. His harsh words shocked me, and I even felt scared. Then, suddenly, Scott smiled and said, I'll decide everything for you, so you just need to do what I say, okay? I didn't know how to respond, so I just smiled awkwardly. Maybe getting engaged to Scott was a mistake, but it was too late to pretend it never happened. I had already told our parents and my company about our engagement. Despite everything, I still loved Scott. I hoped he would go back to being the kind person he was before we got engaged. So, even though I was confused by Scott's changes, I felt I had no choice but to continue with the engagement. Scott kept making comments that troubled me, and with each one, my heart felt more hurt. But I couldn't bring myself to hate him. Even when I thought about breaking up, I remembered the kind Scott I used to know. I still loved him. So, despite my confusion, I stayed in the relationship. Then, one day, something happened that confused me even more. It was the day Scott and I finalized our wedding venue. After visiting several places, Scott chose the luxurious guest house we first visited. With pride, he said, A lavish ceremony really suits me. It's unfortunate for you, though. Scott laughed, and it hurt me. We went to the guest house to sign the paperwork. On the way, I saw someone I didn't expect. Oh, is that you, Scott? It was a woman. Scott looked surprised and said, Mom, what are you doing here? He then introduced us. Kelly, this is my mom, Olivia. Mom, this is Kelly, my fiancée. I told you I was getting married, remember? Olivia greeted me with a smile and said, I'm Scott's mother. You seem like a serious woman. Where do you work? You must be working at a big company, right? This was my first time meeting Scott's mother. I nervously told her about my company and that I do clerical work. Olivia made a puzzled face and said, I've never heard of that company. Scott then joined our conversation and said, Kelly's company is one of my clients. It's a small company with about 20 employees, so it's natural you haven't heard of it. After hearing Scott's explanation, Olivia's face turned grim. I thought since you were Scott's fiancé, you'd be working at a more reputable company. Doesn't that mean your salary is low? Are you planning to make Scott suffer? Olivia's words caught me off guard. I felt embarrassed and quickly said, I'm sorry, my salary isn't very high at my current job. I had no choice but to apologize to Olivia. Olivia sighed heavily and said, Can you at least not rely entirely on Scott? Our family is from a distinguished background. We don't need a woman with a questionable background. I didn't know how to respond to her harsh words. Olivia continued, "What about your parents? They work at reputable companies, right?" She glared at me with narrow eyes. My father is," I started to answer, but then I noticed something familiar in her bag and stopped talking. Seeing my confusion, Scott spoke up, "Come on, Mom, calm down. We're going to visit the house and make our marriage introductions soon, all right?" Olivia didn't look happy and glared at me with a sour expression. It was clear that my first impression on her was terrible. The path to marriage seemed difficult, and I sighed quietly. Then came the day of the marriage introduction. "Wow," I muttered as I stood in front of Scott's family home. It was far beyond anything I had imagined. Olivia had mentioned that their family was distinguished, so I expected them to be wealthy, but the reality was astonishing. The gate was automatic, there was an elevator inside, and there were even 10 luxury cars parked outside. They must be my future father-in-law's hobbies, I thought. Scott then said to me, "Dad is out for work today. It's just Mom, so make yourself comfortable," with a smile, but I felt even more nervous. Olivia had been so harsh to me last time, and I feared she would make more sarcastic remarks. Scott and I entered the living room where Olivia was waiting. "Hello, thank you for the other day," I greeted her politely. The next moment, Olivia said something unbelievable. "Welcome, my maid." Even though she knew I was here for a marriage introduction, this was the first thing she said. "What?" I let out a confused sound, thinking I must have heard wrong. I must have heard wrong. Olivia looked at me with a mean smile and said, "Oh, you aren't the maid? You've got such a poor-looking face." I couldn't believe she said something so awful. Then Olivia laughed, clearly enjoying herself, and said, "Scott told me it's okay to treat you like a maid." It seemed like Scott just wanted to marry someone who would do whatever he said. "Too bad for you, Scott," Olivia said with a smirk. "What do you mean?" I asked Scott, feeling pale and hoping it was a bad joke. I wanted to believe it wasn't true, but the fiancé I thought was on my side betrayed me in the worst way. Scott glanced at my face and burst out laughing. "You're right, she does have a poor-looking face. I'd love to see her parents. Maybe we could use them as our servants too," he said, laughing crudely. "Indeed," Olivia added, "having someone obedient for free is quite nice. But if they come to a rich house like ours, I wonder if Kelly's parents would faint from shock." Olivia and Scott kept looking down on me, and Olivia asked with a laugh, "By the way, what does your father do? He's not homeless, is he?" Scott burst into laughter and replied, "Mom, that's not a job. Given how Kelly is, he probably doesn't have a stable job." This is making my stomach hurt from laughing. Scott and Olivia continued to mock my parents, assuming my family was poorly educated and must have a plain appearance. I gritted my teeth in frustration, unable to bear their rude comments. They even looked down on my parents. I couldn't take it anymore and sent a message to my father while Olivia and Scott weren't looking. "I need you to come now," I wrote, and I also sent him the address of Scott's family home, which Scott had sent me for today's marriage introduction. I remembered it was my father's day off, so he must be relaxing at home. Luckily, my father replied within a minute, saying, "I'm on my way." Feeling relieved, I told Scott and Olivia, "I'm feeling a bit unwell, so I'm going to get some fresh air." I couldn't stand listening to Scott and his remarks any longer. I thought I would wait outside quietly until my father arrived. "Oh, is that so? Well then, Scott, why don't we continue our tea leisurely?" Olivia said, pleased to be alone with Scott. "Kelly, don't you run away," Scott added, his crude laughter echoing as I left. I left my seat and waited outside for my father to arrive. 10 minutes later, he showed up wearing dark sunglasses. "Kelly, what's wrong? Today was supposed to be your marriage introduction, right?" he asked, looking puzzled. Seeing my father, I felt relieved and started to cry, even though I tried hard to hold back the tears. "What's wrong, Kelly?" my father asked, now worried. I explained everything to him, how Scott's attitude changed after we got engaged, and how Olivia joined in looking down on me. I can't forgive them for treating you like that, he said. My father listened quietly but was clearly angry. I told him more about what Olivia had said, and my father laughed. He took off his sunglasses and handed them to me. We're going in now. I'll make sure they regret hurting you, he said firmly. With my father's support, I made up my mind. My love for Scott had faded, replaced by anger. We'll make Scott and his mom regret it, I thought as I put on my father's sunglasses. Together, we entered Scott's family home. I stood in front of Scott and Olivia with my father by my side. Sorry to keep you waiting, I said, standing tall. Olivia, who had initially laughed at me, became stunned when she saw the man beside me. I realized people freeze when they are too surprised. Olivia must have thought she could say something terrible again when I returned, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it this time. I planned to make her pay for her behavior. Olivia already recognized who my father was. My father is the maid's father, I said. His voice was calm, but his eyes were stern. His handsome face made him look even more imposing. Olivia, who recognized my father, was shocked. How could this be? Why is Richard here? Is this some kind of joke? She asked, her cheeks turning red and her eyes sparkling like a young girl's. Scott stood there, clueless and stunned. My father didn't answer Olivia's questions, but kept staring at her and Scott. Olivia blushed under his gaze, which was quite embarrassing for a woman of her age. I looked at Olivia with a cold stare. Scott, now regaining his composure, asked in confusion, Richard? Mom, is he a friend of yours? Scott probably didn't know about my father. He's quite well known among Olivia's generation, but younger people might not recognize him unless they watch TV dramas. Olivia glared at Scott. Scott, how rude of you. This man is a famous actor and my first love. Scott looked shocked and confused. Then Olivia turned to my father, smiling and speaking to him. I'm a big fan of yours, Richard. See, look at this, she said, pulling out her purse to show my father a keychain that only fan club members can buy. I've been a fan for over 22 years, she added, expressing her admiration. Mom, Scott seemed appalled by Olivia's sudden change in behavior. Olivia continued talking to my father, clearly thrilled to see her favorite actor. However, my father's gaze on Olivia was stern. After remaining silent, my father finally spoke up. I understand that you're a fan of mine. However, did you try to treat my precious daughter Kelly as a maid? My father's words made Olivia, who had been full of energy, turn pale and freeze. She started trembling. Ignoring her, my father continued. And you assumed I was homeless without even meeting me. That's quite rude of you. My father glared at Olivia, who started to panic. No, I didn't know Kelly's father was you. Having you join the family is more than welcome, right, Scott? Olivia said desperately, looking to Scott for support. Yes, of course, Scott replied, clearly feeling pressured by Olivia. Olivia tried to justify herself to my father, saying, if I had known, I would have behaved more politely. Please understand, my earlier comments were out of jealousy. I was afraid of losing my son. I was dumbfounded listening to Olivia. She had been looking down on me and my father, but now she was trying to change her tone just because she knew who my father was. She even said, Kelly is a wonderful woman who resembles Richard. Watching their interaction, I thought, I can't let my father be troubled any further. This is my issue. I should be the one to speak up to Olivia. So I told her, I'm breaking off the engagement with Scott. There's no way you'll become family with my dad. What? Kelly, please reconsider. This is my chance to become family with Richard, Olivia said, looking almost tearful. Despite all her terrible behavior towards me, her tearful face couldn't be trusted. I looked at Olivia coldly, but she still thought she could convince me. Seeing me silent, she smiled and said, You want to marry Scott, don't you? I won't oppose it anymore. It's okay, I'll do anything for you. Olivia was desperate to become part of my father's family, willing to do anything, which was a complete change from her earlier attitude. I felt contempt for Olivia's quick change of heart. Softly, I said no, thank you. What? What did you say? Olivia tilted her head, pretending not to hear me. This time, I shouted louder, I absolutely do not want to become family with you. Olivia was shocked by my outburst. I confronted her. You made rude remarks about my job and spoke terribly about my father. I can never forgive that. I made my stance clear. Olivia, realizing she couldn't convince me, turned to my father and said with a smile, Kelly says this, but Richard, you want your daughter to be happy, right? Our family is wealthy, and she'll be happy with us. Some people think money brings happiness, but not me. My father, understanding my feelings, responded to Olivia, Kelly values love over money. Besides, our family has money. I, being an actor, earn a decent amount. Olivia was at a loss for words. It wasn't surprising my father is a well-known actor who appears often in dramas and doesn't struggle with money. Given our family's wealth, there's no reason for me to marry just for money. Olivia fell silent, unable to come up with a good argument. Then my father continued, You say you're a fan of mine, but I despise anyone who mistreats my precious daughter. Could you please not call yourself a fan anymore? Saying this, my father glared at Olivia. She burst into tears and said, If Richard hates me, I won't be able to live. Olivia sobbed uncontrollably. Scott, who had been silent until now, began to speak. You've been quite bold, Kelly. You'll regret it if you break off our engagement. No one will want someone like you, he laughed. Wait a minute, Scott. Olivia tried to stop him, worried about my father's reaction, but Scott continued, I chose a plain woman like you, thinking you'd be obedient. I planned to cheat on you with prettier girls once we were married. Now my plan's ruined. Hearing Scott talk about such things made me realize I had made the right decision. I calmly realized that Scott never loved me. He just wanted a woman who would obey him. My love for Scott had faded a long time ago. While I was thinking this, Scott kept making selfish statements. My father gritted his teeth, looking like he might grab Scott at any moment. It seemed like my turn to fight back. Dad, wait, I said, stomping my father. I let out a smile while still wearing my sunglasses. What's up? Scott seemed a bit surprised by my calm smile. Is this still plain? I asked, taking off the sunglasses with a flourish. Scott froze, staring at my face. I had applied makeup after meeting my father and crying. Normally, I only wore foundation, but now I had on eyeshadow, mascara, and eyeliner. Just a bit of eye makeup had significantly changed my appearance. Is that really you, Kelly? Scott's face turned a bit red. He seemed mesmerized by my makeup-enhanced face. Yes, it's me. I've always downplayed my looks to avoid standing out, but I've decided to stop hiding myself, I said. Until now, I had tried to avoid attention because of my father's fame, but being insulted by Scott and Olivia made me realize it was okay to stand out a bit and show my true self. Scott, with a flushed face, said, If you had been like this from the start, I would have been nice to you. We can still start over. Come on, let's get engaged again, and introduce me to some beautiful actresses through your father. Who would continue with the engagement now, especially with the nerve to ask for actress introductions? I made my stance clear to Scott. The engagement is over. I don't need someone like you anymore. I'll cancel the wedding venue too. What? Scott was stunned, but I wasn't going to let him off easily. Of course, you'll be bearing the cancellation fee for the wedding venue. That's only fair, I continued. Olivia exclaimed in confusion. Wait a minute, it's too much to bear the entire cost. Scott, looking perplexed, couldn't come up with a response. Then my father spoke up. Why not have Scott's father cover it? With all those luxury cars, it shouldn't be a problem, right? My father said this with a refreshing smile. I played my trump card. If you're not happy with this, we can take it to court. Remember, my father is a famous actor, and news about this could stir up his extreme fans who might retaliate. My father has many enthusiastic fans. A critic who once spoke poorly of my father faced severe harassment prank calls and letters with knives. It was so bad that it even made the news. Olivia, remembering that incident, turned pale. She quickly urged Scott, "Scott, you must cover all the cancellation fees. We don't know what might happen." Seeing Olivia's fear, Scott finally understood the seriousness of the situation. "What? Are you kidding?" Scott fell to his knees, looking defeated. "I don't need you in my life." "Dad, let's go home," I said, ignoring the dejected Scott and Olivia. I left with my father. The engagement with Scott was now completely over, and Scott had to pay the full cancellation fee for the wedding venue. It turns out Scott's father is the head of a company, and my father had once appeared in a commercial for that company. Because of this connection, my father informed Scott's father about what happened. Unaware of the situation, Scott's father was furious. He confronted Scott and Olivia harshly, demanding that Scott cover the full cost of the wedding cancellation. As a result, Scott was left with a huge financial burden. The consequences also affected Olivia. She faced divorce initiated by Scott's father. Their treatment of us was one issue, but it wasn't the only reason. Apparently, Olivia had a habit of wasting money, spending a lot on fan activities for my father. The money came from Scott's father, who had already lost patience with her. Moreover, my father revealed that Olivia had sent him inappropriate love letters, writing things like, "I want to divorce and marry you, Richard. My current husband is just a source of money." This enraged Scott's father. Despite Olivia's resistance, the divorce went through with the help of lawyers. I heard rumors that Olivia, saying this wasn't supposed to happen, was now living in tears. She had also been expelled from my father's fan club because of her troublesome behavior. It was probably inevitable. I can't imagine Olivia finding happiness after losing everything. She got what she deserved. Astonishingly, 8 months later, Scott was arrested. He couldn't forget me after I took off my sunglasses that day. Scott started showing up frequently in front of my house. Even after I quit my job, he called me often, begging me to reconsider our engagement, crying on the phone, saying, "I need you, no one else will do." He was only fixated on my looks. Scott cried and clung to his phone, but he was probably only interested in my appearance. The difference between my look before and after makeup was significant. I don't need a man who only cares about looks. I politely refused and then blocked his calls. However, Scott's actions became more intense. I went to the police several times, and sometimes I was even threatened with danger. After a lot of thought, I finally filed a report with the police, and my father agreed with my decision. Eventually, Scott was arrested for trying to break into our house. After his arrest, it seems Scott was fired from his job. Now, all that's left for Scott is a large amount of debt. He probably won't be able to live a decent life anymore. It's the consequence of looking down on people so much. Since then, I've been working as my father's manager. The job is much more challenging than my previous clerical work. I manage my father's schedule, accompany him on site visits, greet people, and negotiate salaries. Before, I only commuted between the company and home, talked to a few people in the office, and mostly worked on the computer. Now, meeting people and talking has become a big part of my job. It's a huge change from before, but I find it incredibly enjoyable. Being a manager is a glamorous job, but it's not just about that. I support my father behind the scenes so he can focus on his acting career. The work hours are irregular, and you need to be adaptable. Most importantly, it's a job that lets me closely support my father. I want to repay him for all the worry I've caused. It's a job I've just started, and there will surely be many challenges, but I want to keep moving forward and do my best alongside my beloved father. Today, I continue to do my best. Don't you dare show up at my graduation ceremony. A boring old hag like you will just be everyone's laughing stock. It's my big day, so absolutely do not come." Hearing those words from Kelly made my head spin. It was clear she didn't see me as family. To her, I was just an embarrassment. "Hey, old hag, where are you now?" The moment I pressed the call button, Kelly's shrill voice pierced my ears. She sounded rushed and full of impatience, almost panicked. "You can't just leave a silly note like that and think it's okay. Where are you now? Come back home now." I could hear Jake's voice too. Both of them were freaking out. "My name is Lisa. I'm a 41-year-old housewife. I've been juggling a part-time job at the local real estate office while raising my daughter Kelly and doing housework for over a decade. I married my husband Jake 13 years ago. Jake had a daughter, Kelly, from his previous wife. I met Jake at my old workplace, a construction company, where he was there for business. Our company was tough on clients, but Jake, always smiling and cheerful, made a good impression on me. I recommended his products to my company, wanting to be helpful. As a result, his company was chosen. That connection led us to go out for meals several times, and we got deeply involved. He proposed, and I happily accepted, quitting my job to prepare for the wedding. Just before the wedding, Jake revealed that he was living alone with his 5-year-old daughter. At first, I thought it was a lie. It was hard to believe, but it was true. I met Kelly a week before the ceremony. She was maybe shy, hiding behind Jake, and wouldn't come out in front of me. That's when I decided I would live with them for Kelly's sake. I wanted to raise her into a fine adult. I planned to take care of Kelly properly, especially until she graduated from high school. I'm not sure why I felt this way, but her anxious eyes peeking out from behind Jake were unforgettable. I made up my mind and decided to marry Jake. It was my first marriage, and my family was against it. My father was furious and said, "They're mocking you." But I went against my parents' wishes and married Jake. If I had listened to my parents, I might have avoided the trouble that was about to start. 13 years have passed since that marriage. Kelly has turned 17 and is supposed to graduate from high school this year. It should be a joyful occasion, but I couldn't feel genuinely happy. The thought, "I'll make her a fine adult," crossed my mind when I decided to marry Jake. "Hey, old hag, where's my t-shirt? Where did you put it? You didn't steal it, did you?" 3 years after we started living together, Kelly began calling me old hag. At first, she was kind and gradually got used to me, but one day she started calling me old, and her attitude became rough. I pulled the t-shirt out from the folded laundry and handed it to Kelly. "Why did you wash it? What if it shrinks? It should have been dry cleaned. You know, you're really clueless, seriously so dumb." I had hand-washed and air-dried the t-shirt because I thought the fabric would get damaged at the cleaners, but I couldn't say that to Kelly. All I could reply was, "I'm sorry." Kelly snatched it from my hand as if she was grabbing it and said, "Really, you're useless," and left with those parting words. Her words were sharp and pierced my heart. I couldn't argue back, so I just apologized. I didn't understand why Kelly had become so rough towards me. At first, I thought she was teased about her father's remarriage, but it seemed that wasn't the case. Around that time, Jake's attitude began to change. He used to smile all the time when he was working, but recently he had stopped showing his smile at home and had become grumpy. He had started calling me "hey" and "you." As Jake's attitude changed, so did Kelly's towards me. I thought there might be something lacking in me, so I made sure not to slack off in household chores and watched over Kelly carefully. I wanted Kelly to grow up to be a respectable adult, but instead, her attitude got worse every day. She called me old hag all the time, and I never heard a thank you from her anymore. It was strange because at parent-teacher conferences, her behavior in class was normal, with no signs of roughness. Jake also talked normally with her and sometimes even smiled. This terrible attitude was only directed at me, which hurt my heart even more. I couldn't talk to Jake about it because he had become distant and completely different from before. I had no one to talk to and felt very alone. Living with a heavy and dark weight on my heart, I was becoming isolated in my own home. Since middle school, Kelly had stopped telling me about school, and Jake attended the events. I had to learn about school events from neighbors. Jake and Kelly seemed to get along well, often going out together. I wanted to be treated as family by them too, and had hoped we could live together happily. It was unbearably painful that it wasn't happening, and Jake's attitude was getting worse. "There's dust on the stairs, clean it up. You're a stay-at-home wife, aren't you? We're running out of toilet paper. Are you even cleaning the bathroom? You really are so clumsy." These were the kinds of things Jake frequently said to me. When we first got married, we each had our roles in household chores. Jake used to do housework while living with Kelly. At first, he was happy that we could share the chores. Now, I'm doing all the household chores. Jake once said that it's ridiculous for a stay-at-home wife to do all the housework. Kelly was an easy child to raise, but somehow that made me feel worse. When I tried to discuss it with Jake, he dismissed it with, "You're not trying hard enough." In the end, it seemed like everything was my fault. The more I tried to talk to Jake, the more a heavy fog clouded my heart. He would nitpick my every small mistake in housework relentlessly. "Can't you even clean properly? Haven't you learned anything all these years? Do you lack learning ability?" Jake looked down on me with disdain. All I could do was apologize. "I'm sorry. I'll try my hardest. Please forgive me." Jake sighed heavily, clearly exasperated. "Even if you try your hardest, you won't be able to do it. That's why you get scolded. Always saying you'll do it, but you've never managed it, have you?" His words continued to chip away at my heart. As time passed, my heart grew weary, and Kelly turned 18. I was curious about Kelly's future plans, but she wouldn't tell me, and Jake wouldn't talk to me about it either. By this time, I had stopped talking to Jake and Kelly unless absolutely necessary. I overheard Kelly and Jake discussing her plans after graduation. I wanted to know, so I stopped and listened. It's settled. I got into college on a recommendation, and I even got a scholarship. "It's all thanks to you, Dad." "Thank you." I could hear Kelly's happy voice. She would never speak to me in such a tone. "Good for you. It's the result of your efforts." It was worth pushing all the housework onto the clumsy maid. What an awful thing to say. He must be talking about me. Yeah, it was a good outlet for stress too. I could hear their contemptuous laughter. I quietly left the spot and hid in the bathroom. It was the only place I could be alone. I crouched in the bathroom, held my head and cried. To think that Jake and Kelly thought of me in such a way. I had endured for the past 12 years. No matter how much my spirit was about to break, I kept being Kelly's mother and Jake's wife. Even when I felt I was at my limit, I forced myself to keep going. There were times when I felt I couldn't get up, but I made myself get up, make lunch, prepare breakfast, and do the laundry and cleaning. If I were honest, I would have preferred to just lie down, but doing so would surely make me no longer needed by Jake and Kelly. That fear kept me going. I spent my days exhausted. Honestly, I don't remember much from that time. One day, when I was out shopping, a neighbor shocked me with the news. The next day was Kelly's high school graduation ceremony. I couldn't admit I didn't know, so I just smiled vaguely and left. As soon as I got home, I collapsed onto the sofa. I had always thought of making Kelly a respectable adult. Graduation from high school was supposed to be a milestone for that. Again, I was the only one left out in this house. I am not allowed to have a smartphone or use a computer. All communication and information came through Jake and Kelly, and they chose to keep me in the dark. I have a simple flip phone that can only make calls. Jake handles all interactions with the school, so I don't even have anyone I can call a mom friend. I have no way to learn about school information. Still, I found out about sports days and performances from neighbors' conversations and kids' chats on their way back from school, and I secretly attended them. I wanted to properly attend the high school graduation and celebrate her step into adulthood. As I was crying on the sofa, Kelly came back from school. "Hey, old hag, what are you slouching around for? It's depressing. You're making the whole house dark. Can't you do something about it?" Kelly glared at me. It was her fault, yet she acted like this. If Kelly had told me the date of the graduation ceremony, I wouldn't have felt this way. For the first time, I felt anger slowly rising from the depths of my heart. "The graduation ceremony is tomorrow, isn't it? Seems like you didn't tell me." I questioned her with a feeling of blame. Kelly looked slightly taken aback by my defiant words, but exaggeratedly sighed to cover it up. "So what? You wouldn't come to the graduation anyway, so why does the date matter to you?" I tilted my head in defiance at Kelly's words. I never said I wouldn't go to the graduation. "Don't come. If a boring old hag like you shows up, you'll be everyone's laughing stock. It's my big day, so definitely do not come." Kelly's words about being everyone's laughing stock made me dizzy. Clearly, Kelly doesn't think of me as family. To her, I am an embarrassment. I thought this time would be different, but she wouldn't see me any other way. "Don't come." Kelly's words pierced my heart. It was clear from her own mouth that I was nothing but a nuisance. That night, Jake came home with a suit and a dry cleaner's bag. He had sent the suit to the dry cleaners himself, without asking me, of course. Jake knew about Kelly's graduation. As I looked at the suit, Jake said with a pitying look and a smirk, "Right, Kelly didn't tell you. Clearly, I am the least needed in this house." Thinking I was family was just my wishful thinking. At that moment, I realized my heart had long reached its limit. That's why I decided to stop being a family. The next day, Jake and Kelly left together for her high school graduation. I was left behind. Moreover, Jake told me, "We'll eat out tonight, so we won't need dinner." I wasn't invited. The old me would have just cried and taken it. But those days ended today. I had decided to leave this house. I made up my mind last night. As soon as they left, I packed my bags, wrote a note, and left the house. I couldn't be a family with Kelly and Jake anymore. I decided to stay at my parents' house, about 3 hours away by train. At my parents' home, I started preparing to cut ties with Jake and Kelly. In the note I left, I wrote that I wanted to end our family relationship and live alone, and that I wished to discuss the details through a lawyer. I hadn't found a lawyer yet, but my father would likely know one. My family owns a lot of land and is known as wealthy landowners in the area. My father also owns considerable real estate and is well known locally. He certainly had lawyers in his circle. I had met a lawyer at a Christmas party when I was at home. Besides finding a lawyer, I had to sell the house where Jake and Kelly were still living. The house was built on land owned by my father, and the construction costs were covered by me as a wedding gift. I had been repaying my father little by little with the money I earned from my part-time job in real estate, which was also introduced by my father. Essentially, the house, both the building and the land, are owned by my father. They are in his name officially. At the time, Jake probably thought the house was a gift since he never asked about the ownership. He was likely too afraid to upset my father and lose the house. Jake is quite the coward. He is aggressively assertive toward those he perceives as beneath him, but to those above him, he is subservient and ingratiating. I explained everything that had happened to my father. As I spoke, tears flowed uncontrollably. I had to stop several times due to my sobbing, but my father listened until the end. There were tears in his eyes too. What comforted me was that my father didn't criticize the decisions I had made back then. In the end, he simply said, "You've had a hard time." Afterwards, my father made calls, and soon lawyers and real estate management people came to the house. Everything happened very quickly after that. It was decided that the house would be demolished, and the demolition was set for 2 weeks later. In the note I left, I wrote, "Please leave within a week." My father sarcastically remarked, "That's quite generous of you." For me, it was just about avoiding later complaints. The week passed as I consulted with the lawyer about the divorce. I also told my mother about the divorce, and we cried together. I can't forget the look on her face, furious, like a demon. I also talked with my father about what would come next. Above all, I needed to set up a new foundation for my life. It took courage to talk to my parents, and it was hard, but once I did, my heart felt lighter, and I slept soundly for the first time in 12 years. A week passed peacefully at my parents' home. Then my cell phone rang. As expected, it was Kelly. Honestly, I didn't want to talk anymore. Remembering how Kelly had treated me all this time, a dark feeling spread through my heart. I decided to ignore the call, but the calls didn't stop. Jake also started calling repeatedly. They were probably calling about the note I left, and maybe the demolition crew had also contacted them. For 12 years, Jake and Kelly had called me old hag and treated me like a servant. The way they treated me was not how family should treat each other. The thought of dealing with them again made my skin crawl, but leaving things as they were wasn't right either. I couldn't move forward without settling the past. If I ran away now and left things unfinished, I wouldn't feel at peace. After the way they treated me, it was time for Jake and Kelly to face the consequences. I braced myself and answered the phone. "Hey, old hag, where are you now?" As soon as I pressed the call button, Kelly's shrill voice pierced my ears. Her tone was rushed, full of impatience and panic. "Leaving a ridiculous note like that, you think that's forgivable? Where are you now? Come back right now." I could hear Jake's voice as well. Both of them were in a complete panic. I imagined Kelly coming home from graduation, finding that this servant-like woman who used to relieve their stress was gone. Moreover, there was a note saying divorce and leave the house. Even Kelly would panic in such a situation, especially on the day of her graduation ceremony. I couldn't help but let out a chuckle at how flustered Kelly was. Who is this?" Kelly seemed surprised by my response and stumbled over her words. I hung up the phone. Afterwards, I called the real estate management company to check when the demolition was starting. It was scheduled for tomorrow as planned, and Jake had already been notified. I asked to postpone the demolition to the day after tomorrow and requested that Jake be informed of the one-day delay. The one-day reprieve was granted. Jake would probably come here then. I was ready to deliver a heavy blow to Jake and Kelly. There were dozens of calls from them, but I ignored them all. The next day, around noon, I heard the doorbell and knocking. It must be Jake and Kelly. They probably wanted to come earlier, but the poor train connections made it take a long time. Jake and Kelly were panting heavily, looking really anxious. I had arranged for my parents to stay out of sight, so it looked like I was the only one home. I showed Jake and Kelly into the living room. Jake entered the house hesitantly, intimidated by my father, who is a wealthy and well-known figure in town with a commanding presence. Jake probably sees himself as beneath my father. On the other hand, Kelly wasn't intimidated at all. She seemed determined to confront me and take me back. Kelly slumped into a chair in the living room, crossing her legs and arms, silently motioning for me to sit opposite her. I prepared tea slowly and calmly before sitting across from her. Growing impatient, Kelly started to speak. "What the heck is all this about?" Jake, who was sitting next to me, placed the note I had left on the table. I just stared silently into Kelly's eyes without any reaction. Kelly looked away first, trying to shake off the awkwardness with a laugh. "What was with that 'who is this' yesterday? That was some pretty bad acting." Still, I remained silent, staring at Kelly. She became uncomfortable under my gaze, shifted in her seat, and continued talking. "Look, you can't make it on your own without us. You're nothing but trash." I almost reacted to Kelly's harsh words, but managed to restrain myself because I could hear the tremor in her voice. Kelly must be putting on a brave front. So far, Jake had been silent, just watching how things unfolded. "Stop being so stubborn and come back home," Kelly berated me with harsh words, trying to confuse and drag me back home. The more excited Kelly got, the calmer I responded. I don't have a family, do I? Oh, I do have parents, but you two aren't my family, are you? I said. Kelly, for her part, probably felt out of her depth. She started talking loudly. What are you talking about? You and Dad are my family, right? Hey, Dad, that's right, isn't it? Kelly must have felt at a disadvantage alone, so she asked Jake for help. Jake looked around nervously and, seeing that no one else was around, seemed relieved and started talking to me. That's right, you can't live without us, just like Kelly says, so you're coming back. Jake began to act all high and mighty when he saw my parents weren't around. Looking back, I realized what a cowardly man he is. As I said before, I have no family, I answered firmly. No matter what Jake and Kelly say, I'll keep treating them as strangers. Jake and Kelly are not my family. If they were, they wouldn't treat me like a slave. Family is about holding hands and helping each other. When someone in the family is in trouble, it's normal for the family to support them. However, Jake and Kelly were different. They've been treating me as a servant and an outlet for stress for over 12 years. Jake and Kelly insist that this is normal. They're unaware of how terrible and wrong it is. They've been oppressing me unconsciously. I'm amazed I've put up with it for 12 years. I'm impressed with myself. It all started when I saw Kelly peeking from behind Jake. I was bound by my own words to raise Kelly into a fine adult. Because of these words, I've been desperately serving Jake and Kelly. That's why I endured until her high school graduation. I had decided that when Kelly graduated from high school and was ready to leave, it would be time to draw the line. I had a faint hope that Jake and Kelly would change their attitude towards me by then, and we could be a family. But they betrayed my expectations, leading to this situation. Everything was decided by their attitude the day before the graduation ceremony. So I'm facing them with the appropriate attitude now. Jake and Kelly are no longer my family, which is why I don't treat them as family. Kelly started to change her tone, realizing the seriousness. We are family, aren't we, Mom? Stop putting on this silly act, please. Before I knew it, she had switched from calling me old hag to Mom. Apparently, Kelly began to understand that things wouldn't go as they used to. Jake watched anxiously as he looked at me and Kelly. You may not be my birth mother, but we've lived together all this time, so please listen to my request. Kelly unfolded her crossed arms and clasped her hands in front of her. She had been sitting back, but now she was leaning forward. I have no obligation to listen to requests from someone who isn't family, I continued, keeping my emotions in check. Tears appeared in Kelly's eyes as she pleaded desperately, please listen to me. That note was a lie, right? You're not really going to sell the house, are you? It can't be true because you are part of our family, Mom. I felt disgusted by the way Kelly said Mom. What concerned her was the house, not me. She must be anxious about losing her home. It's true that the house will be gone. Is that what you're worried about? I asked. It seemed all that mattered was having a place to live, even if I wasn't there. No matter how much Kelly begged, my feelings wouldn't change. Kelly hung her head and cried. Jake, upset by Kelly's tears, lashed out at me. What kind of joke is this? Enough with your disrespectful attitude. What's with that note? Come back right now and stop the demolition. I responded with suppressed emotion in my voice. I can't. It's already decided. Do you think you can do this to your family and get away with it? Jake yelled. That's why I keep telling you, you are not my family, I replied, but neither Jake nor Kelly seemed to be listening. Enough already. Haven't I been saying we're not family? I thought, feeling like I was repeating myself. Jake suddenly stood up and slammed his fist on the table. Don't mess with me. I was shocked but kept my emotions in check. Who's messing around? You haven't treated me as family for 12 years, and now you can't suddenly act like it. That's impossible. My voice came out harsher than I expected. I was angry too, even though I didn't show it. Anger was bubbling up inside me like magma. I couldn't forgive Jake and Kelly's incredibly selfish actions. They trampled on my 12 years of suffering and efforts to become a family with them. They rejected, mocked, and exploited me extensively. I was left out, feeling lonely and in pain. I had wished countless times to be treated as family, but my wish was never fulfilled. It took me 12 years to give up. I continued to strive to build a relationship as Kelly's mother, as family, but it ended like this. A self-mocking smile appeared on my face. Seeing my dry smile, Jake and Kelly stared at me in shock. Jake seemed to lose strength and slumped down into his chair. These two never understood my feelings and tried to exploit me until the very end. I cared for Jake and Kelly, but they never cared for me. No matter how much I cherished them, they never cherished me. And now, when they're in trouble, they try to use me, claiming we're family, something they never believed in. It's too convenient. I feel not just a headache, but even nausea. Why did I put up with these people for 12 years? Looking back, it's strange, but it's pointless now. There's no future for the three of us together anymore. All I can do is make Jake and Kelly acknowledge their guilt and make amends. I no longer expect anything from Kelly or Jake, nor do I trust them. Jake stood up and apologized deeply. I'm sorry, please come back, I'm begging you. No matter how he apologizes, it doesn't resonate with me at all. I won't reach out to help, and I definitely don't think about living together. Enough already. I'm not your family anymore. I'm a stranger to you. Kelly also began to apologize deeply. I'm sorry, please forgive me. We're family, so I want to go back home together. I'm appalled by her selfish way of speaking. After treating me like a stranger for 12 years, now what? Come back because we're family? Did she think I'd be okay with that? That's too naive. No way. It seemed I could no longer keep my composure. Words I would never have said before came out of my mouth. I don't want to hear your excuses. I can't trust any words anymore. I definitely can't think of us as a family ever again. Then I placed a single piece of paper in front of Jake. It was a divorce form. Of course, I had already signed it. Hurry up and sign the divorce form. I'll file it myself. Write it here right now. Jake shook his head vigorously, then showed me a smile. Think it over, okay? I was shocked at how bad Jake was at the end of our life together. He really is a small-minded man. I had always misunderstood Jake's ingratiating smile. The smile he showed when we first met was a sleazy expression of sizing someone up. I mistook it for the smile of a kind person. Thinking about it now still makes me angry. I stood up and called for my parents in the back. My parents then entered the living room. Jake's mouth hung open, as if his jaw had dropped. Father-in-law, he stammered. My father glared sharply at Jake, and my mother also looked stern. Just being glared at made Jake shrink and cower. I'm very sorry. Jake started apologizing deeply and forced Kelly to do the same. I've troubled you because of Lisa's misconduct. I thought I heard wrong. My misconduct? Was Jake still trying to evade responsibility? My father's eyebrow twitched, but he remained silent. Lisa, well, she left home on her own, so I was just trying to persuade her to come back, right, Kelly? Jake urged Kelly to agree with his ridiculous story. Lisa's misconduct. Don't joke with me. My father's loud voice echoed through the house, making the windows rattle. Jake and Kelly gasped quietly. My father stood in front of Jake, meeting his gaze. How can you say Lisa was being selfish? You only think of yourself. You really are a petty man. Then he turned to Kelly. You've done some terrible things too, Kelly. What did you think of Lisa? You did it again. My father's loud voice reverberated throughout the room. Kelly must have been really scared. Her body was trembling. My father stood towering over them with a stern look. Kelly, you've been causing problems at school too. I've looked into it. Using my father's connections, we hired a private investigator, and it turns out Kelly had been extorting money from a girl at school. The victim was too scared to confide in anyone, but my father arranged for her to file a criminal complaint. Kelly, with wide eyes, exclaimed, "She ratted me out, didn't she?" I felt like I had seen Kelly's true nature. She hadn't reflected at all. She was only thinking about getting through this situation. "And you, Jake, you've been embezzling money from the company." This too was revealed by the private investigator. Jake had been making fake business trips. I hired the investigator to strengthen my case for divorce, but the investigation uncovered appalling facts about both of them. "Why, how could you even? Was it her?" Jake reacted just like Kelly, showing no remorse at all. They were so bad at accepting their fate. Neither of them would escape punishment from me. They would face societal sanctions too. Then my mother spoke up. "All right, the discussion is over. Sign the divorce papers and leave this house immediately." Jake, sobbing and muttering "No, no," gave up when my father handed him the pen. He sat down and signed the divorce papers. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 8:00 p.m., and the last train was at 8:25 p.m. If they missed it, there would be no trains until tomorrow morning. In this small town, there were no other means of transportation. If they didn't catch the last train, Jake and Kelly would miss the demolition scheduled for tomorrow. They probably hadn't packed their bags, thinking they could persuade me. While I was hesitating whether to tell them, Kelly suddenly said something unbelievable with a sulky attitude. "But this divorce was initiated by you, right, Mom? Dad, you should get alimony." Kelly must have been desperate after being exposed. My parents looked shocked. "That's impossible. What you two have done is outright domestic abuse and a crime," I said. Kelly, momentarily taken aback, retorted defiantly, "Show the evidence then." I placed a notebook on the table. "This is a diary I've been keeping since we got married." Kelly glared at me with a mocking look. "You don't even have a smartphone or computer. What kind of evidence could you possibly have?" "You seem not to know that a diary can be substantial evidence. It's not just videos, audio, and pictures that count as proof," I explained. Kelly looked dumbfounded. Yes, our lawyer agreed too. This diary is valid evidence. Jake and Kelly finally hung their heads in resignation. I exaggeratedly checked my wristwatch. "The last train has already left. I guess you can't get back home tonight." Mother also looked on with a smug face at Jake and Kelly. "That's right. There are no taxis around here either. I wonder if there's even a decent hotel nearby. Well, our business here is done. Get out now." Jake and Kelly were rushed out of the house. They probably couldn't believe the last train left so early. I watched them hurrying toward the station from the second-floor balcony. As I watched Jake and Kelly's flustered backs, everything that had been building up inside me began to flow away. There were still some loose ends to tie up, but it felt like it was finally over. Jake and Kelly missed the last train and, unable to catch a taxi, ended up walking for about an hour to a hotel. The next day, when they got to the house, the demolition had progressed, and they managed to salvage only their clothes. Actually, I had temporarily stored the furniture, appliances, and my personal items in a warehouse, but I didn't tell Jake and Kelly. I got a report from the lawyer that the divorce was finalized, including a claim for alimony. Jake was reluctant to pay, but his company was pressured to ensure the payment. According to the private investigator, Jake was fired from his company for embezzlement. Kelly ended up getting involved with the police and was expelled from both college and high school. Jobless, Jake could only afford to lease a small, old apartment far from the station. He lives there with Kelly, who dropped out of high school. Kelly blames everything on Jake, and Jake criticizes Kelly at every opportunity, leading to endless arguments between them, as reported by the private investigator. I was considering what to do next after quitting my part-time job at a real estate agency. Then my father suggested I help with the family business, and I got a job managing his resort real estate company. Living in a resort area is quite different from city life, but being surrounded by nature is a refreshing change. I've also started keeping a dog, so living alone isn't lonely. Right now, this dog is all the family I need. I think I'll just live a relaxed life with my dog from now on.